This is the moment that I've been waiting for because we get to have this conversation about the journey. And we are headed towards the end of our journey, our CareFest journey together. But we are on a journey to change the way that we value and support care in this country together. And that continues. I know many of us are also going back to our caregiving roles and responsibilities. And so I'm hoping that from this conversation, we're able to get some wisdom from two dear friends and incredible caregivers and leaders to take with us as we head out on our journeys home. And I have these official bios for these two people. So I'm going to do a mix so you know who we're about to hear from the on paper, but then I'm also going to say a few things. So for more than 25 years, activist, advocate, and author Tarana Burke has worked at the intersection of sexual violence and racial justice. She's also the mother of the Me Too movement and has mentored thousands of young women of color in the movement. She has written this memoir called Unbound. I don't know how many of you have read it. Okay, some people have. I do think we should give her this book a round of applause.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
It is brave and it's brilliant and it belongs in the canon. So please, if you haven't read it, do. And then we have with us Dawn Lyen-Gardner, who some of you may recognize as Charlie from the show Queen Sugar. She was, nominated for an NAACP Image Award for her role as Charlie. But I know her as organizer, activist, leader at the intersection of so many issues, from immigrant rights to racial justice to gender equity. She's also a proud member of Harness, right?
Yes.
Yes, give it up for Harness, a social justice collective. And I've been door knocking with her, and I see the thing that these two incredible women have in common is that they, when you meet them, they immediately feel like home, like give you a sense of your humanity and that you belong. And I think that there's so much wisdom that they have gained from their experience as caregivers and also that inform their caregiving that we're going to try to pull out. So I want to actually start there. If you all would share a little bit about your journey as caregivers, how it's changed over time, and what you've learned. Starting with you, Tarana.
Starting with me. First of all, let me just say, I've said this over and over again, this conference has changed me. That does not happen. It really doesn't. I mean, y'all been to 100 conferences, right? Probably in your lifetime. And we go, and it's usually preaching to the choir, to stuff you know. That didn't happen this time. I really feel changed, and I want to thank you for that. And mostly I'm changed because I have been thinking about my caregiver journey, but actually I want to say something about my journey as a being taken care of. People who've read my other book, what's it called? You Are Your Best Thing. Sorry. I have a book that I co-edited with Brene Brown called You Are Your Best Thing. In that book, I talk about the fact that I had a stroke in 2020, a minor stroke in 2020. Even I don't know why we major or minor those, because it was very scary. And as a result, I also have a neurological condition. And I had a major episode of that condition last year. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because of that, when I have these episodes, it renders me unable to utilize my body. I can't move on my own. It is a very scary thing. And my mother, who's always most of our first caretakers, But I could not imagine that at 49, my mother would still be my caretaker. And my mother at 72 was bathing me and taking me to the bathroom and walking. I had to walk with a walker. This is 9 days of being incapacitated. And so this conference brought that up for me, you know. And, you know, I would absolutely do that for my mother, right? I also, earlier today I was talking about like when my grandmother was getting heart surgery and I went and spent the summer with her waiting for the beeper to go off, right? I just think the ways that I have been cared for and I have been a caretaker have been second nature through all my life. Because it just comes from a place of love and caring that has been ingrained in me by mostly the women, but my family is just what you do, right? You show up and you stay until. So yeah.
Yeah, when I first met you, Dawn, you were already in deep on caregiving for your family members, and becoming a parent the caregiving has just continues to evolve. So can you share a little bit about your story?
Yeah. I've learned that there is something called the sandwich generation, or a sandwich generation, that I'm in it right now. So what brings me really even more deeply into this conversation is my father now lives with us. He is completely bedbound. He is in the end stage of Parkinson's, and he's on hospice. So it has been an education in so many ways, even though I was already, responsible for arranging his care and with my brother, larger brother, who was giving the care. But doing the actual care work and the caregiving, it has been some of the most important time of my life, really. Deeply sacred time, deeply difficult financially time. All the things that we all go through and deal with, it's hit. And then add to the mix a now 16-month-old, right? So, we brought my dad in when he was, when my son was 8 months old, I think. And just everything in my life has now been centered around care. Every aspect of it is centered around care. I spend most of my days managing in some way care needs, the arranging, just managing. And then in the evenings, it's my partner and me, and my partner is a hospice and palliative care physician. So this work is just in my life very deeply, and I feel like I think I've learned more than I ever thought I could in this time. One, the vulnerability of both parties, of the person getting the care and the person giving the care, is so extraordinary that it is the most humanizing of work. I feel like it's the antidote, really, to this era of narcissism that we seem to be navigating, right? Because what we need is care, right? It's cultures of care. And two, it has visibilized this work for me, right? My partner and I were talking about this on the way here, and as a hospice and palliative care physician, he sees a lot of caregivers in homes. He does home visits, and he said, unlike many other public-facing professions, you don't see the work. There aren't a lot of witnesses to the work. It all happens in homes. So you can be driving by in a neighborhood, in a street, and you don't know if there's care happening in that home.
Right.
And so as a storyteller, as a person in the entertainment industry, the onus is actually on us, right, to center those narratives, because that may be the way that people actually have access to what that looks like, and to how that work is so humanizing and is so layered and is so dimensional and critical to our economy and deserving of value and of support and of policy. So
What we saw it made.
Exactly. And then for women of color, it's the layers of profound meaning, right? From the history of our being in this country to our legacies and our ancestors and the different generations of care workers and domestic workers to our being in a sandwich generation and navigating our careers and our financial needs and all of the impact that it has on our lives, and it being potentially something that might save us from a certain kind of me self-focus that is very common these days. So that's what I feel I've learned in this time.
The era of narcissism and care is the antidote. I also think we are living through an era of loneliness and social isolation that increasingly people are talking about as an epidemic. And I know, Tarana, you've been thinking a lot about grace and how we need to cultivate that in the era of narcissism and loneliness. And what could you say to help us as caregivers and as people in a movement to value care about how to channel grace?
So grace has been on my mind for a long time. Not grace in the traditional sense that most people think about grace from like sort of a Christian perspective. And I am Christian, but I'm thinking about grace and the utility of grace and how it's sort of underutilized, but also what would happen if grace had a political analysis, right? Because I actually don't believe we can have a politic of liberation without a politic of grace. And so when I think about care and care workers, right, in terms of the political analysis, we are, and because there's so many people of color, because there's so many people from low wealth communities who are doing this unpaid labor especially, these are the people who, it's always the people who have the least who are asked to give the most. And so my idea of grace is called revolutionary grace. So it's the name of my next book. But yeah, I think about revolutionary grace, which means what would it look like if the people who have the least got the most grace first? That means we would have different policies, right? That means, like we were talking about in our panel, that means that we would be attacking the things that cause us. So in our other panel, Dawn was talking about this innate desire to take care of our loved ones, right? Beyond just, we do it because we have to, but we do it because we want to. And yes, we're tired, and yes, but we still want to. And part of the problem is that we are struggling because of the other things that make us tired, right? We want to care for our loved ones, but we don't make enough money, but we don't have these other resources. And so a revolutionary grace is about alleviation, grace, from these other areas, right? So we need to deal with the things that cause us not to have relief so that we can do the things that we love, that we're called to do, right? As Black women, in particular, we don't see grace. Women of color, we are asked to give grace all the time. Give more and more and more. And so revolutionary grace starts with the least of these, right? We are always talking about being pushed to the margins from a center that we did not create. So I just have all these, I think that this country needs a revolutionary politic of grace. And that's what I'm thinking and writing about.
I could talk to these two for hours more, but I want to close. I need to close us out. The time is running out. But I do want to ask Dawn, when I knocked doors with you in 2018, there were so many voters who you talked to who needed some hope. And when I talk to caregivers, a lot of times caregivers are wondering and are concerned that change may not be possible, right? And I think we're going to be dealing with that a lot as we continue this work going forward. And so what would you say to give caregivers hope going forward?
I find hope in the work itself, because the work itself demands and requires being present to the hardest of times, people at their most vulnerable. And that is only going to increase with the numbers coming right now of the aging generation. And so caregiving is going to be required of more people. It's going to force us to bedsides and to be present. And in just that, we may actually realize we have been undervaluing. More of us may realize it, and more of us may fight to shift that. And the work itself, I think, is a work of really sacred space. So I find hope in that. I find hope that it's very hard to do caregiving if you don't care. You know, it's hard. It's actually physically hard to do it.
It's impossible.
It's impossible to do it. And so the more that work is going to be required, and it's about to be, as you have said, a tsunami. It's happening now. More of us are going to find ourselves at bedsides. More of us are going to find ourselves wiping behinds, right? And doing that very real work. And in that sandwich place, I literally last night was changing my dad, trying to beat the clock with the monitor right there, trying to see if my baby's going to start crying. They did. Finished change, ran upstairs. I mean, that's the reality. And the more of us that experience that and realize that there's this thing called caregiving, and we need to fight to care for the caregivers. We need to fight for policies to be humane, and to be, for families to be supported. And I have hope in that. I have hope that the work itself is actually the humanizing force.
And there's more and more of us doing it.
That's right.
And our work is finding each other.
Yes.
Connecting like we have been the last couple of days, and then continuing to connect more and more people into this movement. You want to say anything about hope before we close out?
Oh yeah, let me tell you something. Like, I know this sounds terrible because I'm the big movement leader person, but it's hard to find hope these days. And I think people understand that. And if you can pull this off, seriously, I mean that. This conference in and of itself is hopeful. You gathered people to talk about, I said this last night, I'm gonna say it again. Movements are built in the gaps. When you can successfully see a gap and see what's missing and get people to notice the gaps and care about the gaps, you have done a phenomenal thing. And that's what you've done. And I know you didn't do it alone. But what y'all have done is you have built a space in the gaps and made it a thing. When I asked on the panel, can y'all help define what caregiving is? The more, I am so hopeful that the more people see and understand themselves as caregivers. I wouldn't have called myself a caregiver before this conference. And I see it in all these different ways. I wouldn't have called my mother a caregiver by definition, right? Although I know that she has. That is giving me hope that first there's a definition, then I see the policies that go around it, then I see the way we can get to the policies. I see it now. I'm very clear. I'm leaving here, I told you that, I'm leaving here changed. There's something else to fight for. That gives me hope. It makes me a little tired. But I was already tired. So let's get it.
I think that's a beautiful place to end. Thank you so much, Tarana and Dawn. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for giving us hope.
Yes.
Another round of applause.